Hello there. Welcome to Inspired a Galaxy.
In this segment of the ORP, we discuss the artists and stories that inspired us and hope that they inspire you.
And now, we present the episode.
Hello, and welcome to a very special Inspired a Galaxy episode today from the Old Republic podcast. You got Brian and Cassia here with you. And Cassia, normally you tell me about all these books that I need to read. And you could have, in this instance, went for the book, because today we're talking about a book, kind of. But we're also talking about a movie, kind of. It's a Princess of Mars, John Carter of Mars, John Carter. It's a horse of many different colors, so to speak. But it all goes back to the 1912 novel Princess of Mars by Edgar Rice Burroughs. And you've read it. I never have, but you told me to watch the movie, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I guess the Mars, the extended Mars universe here.
The Mars Cinematic Universe. We could call it the MCU. So,
Ooh.
Just kidding. I think it's
Copyright
called the Barsoom series. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that's what the locals call it. They don't call it Mars. They call it Barsoom. So, yeah. I think a lot of people had no idea what this eventual film was going to be about because of their quote unquote ad campaign, marketing, quote unquote,
Mm-hmm.
But we're not quite there yet, but because we're like doing the mother of all Inspired a Galaxy episodes today, I guess. So kind of like how I talk about it, it's like, oh, John Carter or John Carter of Mars, but it's called the Barsoom series most typically. It was written by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and do you know what other series he wrote?
I do not. I'm not super familiar with this, and I'm not even really that familiar with Princess of Mars, to be quite honest. Anytime I've ever heard like mention of this in terms of like an inspiration to people, I don't know if it's just the way that it was written or because I've been doing, kind of most of this research, I guess, after this film had come out. But most of the times that I saw it mentioned, it was mentioned as, John Carter of Mars. And I think there might have been like a comic series that was titled that at some point. And the name gets a little bit fuzzy, and we're going to talk a little bit about that when we get into the movie bit. But yeah, Princess of Mars wasn't something I was super familiar with. Edgar Rice Burroughs isn't an author I'm super familiar with, but very inspirational on his end for this, this work of literature that he put out.
So this was actually written by the author who wrote the Tarzan series.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and it's like, how many Tarzan movies have there been? A lot of them, and
a lot.
There's only been, one Barsoom movie, but pretty much since like 1912, like the idea has like kind of been in people's minds, but they're like, we kind of just lack the effects to really pull it off, but it's kind of been in development hell for that long. But kind of like looking at Edgar Rice Burroughs' like biography gives me hope. Like, he wrote it at 36 after kind of a hard life. No job really worked out for him the way he imagined it. He lived all over, including Arizona and Idaho, and kind of like when he's talking about like why he turned to writing, he's like, I wrote to escape poverty, because like he would read some of like the pulp fiction of the day. And why it's called pulp fiction is because it's kind of written on kind of lower quality paper. It's not as like, it was a little bit more chunky and pulpier. That's where the term pulp fiction comes from. He ended up reading that, and he's like, I think, like, I don't know if I could do better, but I can do that, So it was kind of like serialized February through July 1912 as Under the Moons of Mars. And he kind of took what he wrote in 1917 and made it into a novel called A Princess of Mars. And his pseudonym, he wanted it to be like Normal Being, but the typesetter is like, I think you mean Norman beans, so that's how it was first published. So I kind of thought that was funny. So
Hmm. Yeah, that is pretty funny, and yeah, you can take inspiration from all over the place, kind of at any time of your life. So that's really great to come up with this work, at age 36 that would, really resound throughout, the next like century, right? So Princess of Mars, published in 1912, but it went on to inspire a lot of different people here. So just a couple that I found. So it inspires Robert A. Heinlein, uh, the writer who wrote Starship Troopers, Arthur C. Clarke, who wrote 2001: A Space Odyssey, Ray Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451. It inspired the scientist, one of the most famous, scientists of all time, Carl Sagan. It inspired James Cameron, who cites specifically Princess of Mars as the inspiration for Avatar, which makes a lot of sense because I definitely see a lot of parallels there. And it's funny that you'd mentioned that I didn't know that Edgar Rice Burroughs had also written Tarzan, because I see a lot of similarities kind of between the two characters there in Tarzan and in John Carter. And obviously here we're Star Wars primarily podcast. So what kind of strings did these have to George Lucas? I didn't find any like instances where George Lucas specifically cited Princess of Mars as being an inspiration, but the King Features Syndicate, who were publishing the Buck Rogers serial, little cartoon strips, tried to get the right to Princess of Mars comic, but they were unsuccessful. So the King Features ended up making their own comic, kind of in the same vein as that, as Flash Gordon, which ultimately, was very influential to George Lucas. So kind of an indirect tie there to young George growing up on these stories that were, kind of created out of, kind of the same kind of mindset and same inspirations.
yeah, I mean, if you kind of look at the original cover, which I think is a beautiful cover, actually. We'll probably put it onto the YouTube video so you can see it. But you have John Carter protecting Deja Thoris, who is the titular Princess of Mars, and it's kind of an archetypal image we see in many places, but also, like you mentioned, like in Flash Gordon and Buck Rogers and A New Hope, and it's kind of funny because like the Barsoom rights were hard to get and hard to produce, so then like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon were made, and like you said, like Lucas wanted to adapt like something like Flash Gordon or Buck Rogers, but it was hard to produce and hard to get the rights, so he's like, you know what, I'm just going to make something that's kind of inspired by that. So like when I kind of describe Star Wars, like what inspired it, I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's Western, it's this, but for me, I kind of see it as inspired by like the hero's journey / monomyth. I see it as inspired by Akira Kurosawa's The Hidden Fortress, and I see it as something inspired by Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, which, if you kind of look at the lineage of, creativity there, you could argue that the granddaddy of Star Wars is actually the Barsoom series, so that got me excited.
Yeah, definitely. This was, kind of one piece of that puzzle that ultimately, turned into what we would know as, becoming Star Wars, between, kind of these actiony serial type things, the Westerns, the Kira Kurosawa, samurai films, those types of things. They were all kind of, thrown into a blender, I guess, so to speak, in George Lucas's mind to come up with this. So I thought that it was interesting that, while not a direct link here to George Lucas, it kind of it inspired and it kind of forced the hand into creating something that would ultimately go on to inspire him. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And I also thought it was interesting, like you mentioned, Cassia, this has been in basically, in quote unquote development hell since the dawn of this thing, right? So kind of in my own research here, apparently in 1931, Edgar Rice Burroughs was approached to turn this into an animated film, which they actually, I guess, did and started working on. And they started screening kind of that footage in like 1936, but it was flopping really hard. Maybe that was an indication that the story wasn't meant for the big screen. I don't know, but we're going to keep trying here. In 1950s, Ray Harryhausen, who is a special effects guru in the 50s, wants to adapt this into a feature film, but that never comes to fruition. In the 1980s, Disney buys the rights to the film rights for the story, but they don't do anything with it, so that lapses. In 2004, Paramount then tries their hand at it, gets the rights. They actually slate Robert Rodriguez. He signs on to direct the film, but ends up leaving. They hire Kerry Conran, who comes on and leaves, and then they hire Jon Favreau to come on and do the story. And he's kind of keen on doing it. He wanted to turn it into more of a Planet of the Apes type of a story, which I like a lot, and maybe I'll dig into that when we get into the film a little bit here. But Paramount ends up letting that license lapse, so they don't ever end up doing anything with it either. And Favreau goes on to direct a little-known film called Iron Man, just there right after that. But in 2008, Disney is back on the Princess of Mars train. Andrew Stanton, who is most notably the director and creative mind behind like Wall-E and Finding Nemo, he starts pitching himself to be the man to lead this film. And that's how we go from the 1912 book to the 2012 Disney film.
Yeah. So if you can catch all of these paper rustling noises, it's because that's what you're hearing, still analog, still.
That's the pages of all of these executives trying to figure out how to spend a lot of money to make John Carter, and Disney were the ones that finally were able to pull the trigger to do it, because boy howdy did they spend a lot of money.
It was a lot of Earth dollars that they spent. So I guess should I just kind of dive into like what is John Carter that came out in 2012, We thought it would be the end of the world in 2012, but it was really just the end of the John Carter Hopes for Trilogy year,
Yeah,
But
it definitely was that. It was the end of the John Carter film, because like I mentioned, Disney bought the film or brought the film rights back in 2008, and they intended to do a trilogy of these films, which obviously never came to fruition. The budget kind of got out of control, lost a lot of money, so the trilogy was never going to happen. Plus, another Disney film came out that same year, The Avengers, which crossed the $1 billion threshold.
Yeah.
So if you have a film that makes $1 billion and you have a film that loses, I don't know, like $80 million, something like that,
makes money.
You stick with the one that makes you money. But there was a bunch of stuff that went into the production of the movie that was kind of head scratchy, right? So the book, obviously, as we mentioned, was called Princess of Mars, so that was the title of the film, and then they changed it to
a Disney princess movie. Just saying.
Could have been a Disney princess movie. Does that make? I guess technically that does make our Deja Thoris here, played by Lynn Collins in the film. I guess that kind of makes her a Disney princess. I don't know, but the title is scrapped, right? Disney doesn't want to have Princess of Mars be the title. I don't know if that's a good call or a bad call. They changed it to John Carter of Mars, which maybe makes more sense, I guess, from a marketing standpoint. You're kind of marketing on John Carter, played by Taylor Kitsch in this film. Maybe that makes more sense, but they scrap the Mars altogether and just call it John Carter, which leaves people like myself who didn't know anything about the book wondering, what the heck is John Carter?
Yeah, so it's kind of funny because for as inspirational as the book series was, there's 11 of these books. I've only read A Princess of Mars, and I've gotten partway through The Gods of Mars. Life just got busy, and sometimes it's just a little bit harder to read, books that kind of came out more than a century ago. Some of the word usages have changed, and some of the world views have changed, but I still think it's valuable. But I'm some of the marketing, it's they didn't even mention that in the first trailer, by Edgar Rice Burroughs, creator of Tarzan, and now the Barsoom series that was first published in 1912 comes to you a century later. None of that happened. And I'm just who's in charge of the marketing? And I'm pretty sure it was Andrew Stanton, and it was like, cool. Those decisions, I think they tried to backtrack them
Hmm.
later, but I think it was a little too late. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, they're just copying Avatar. And it's kind of funny because, if anything, like, the Barsoom series, like, inspired a lot of sci-fi, including, Avatar. So
Hmm.
it's funny.
Yeah, there were weird marketing decisions made, and obviously the name change is one. Andrew Stanton's kind of direction of the marketing plan, I guess. Kind of from what I read, you get some differing accounts there, but it was kind of standoffish to ideas and really wanted to do his own thing with it, which obviously I guess in the scheme of things did not end up going very well. The production budget here on this, Disney had kind of reported that it was like $264 million, but later came out to be really about $306 million. Um,
Oh,
so kind of the rule of thumb in this Hollywood system that these movies operate in is you have to basically kind of double your budget to consider that as like the break even, right? Like you need to get like twice your money back basically to have made sense to spend $300 million on something, right? You want to get some return there. So it was probably never going to really do that. It ended up making about $284 million worldwide, only about 70 million of that here in the United States, which placed it 28th overall for the year. So, the Avengers was
yeah.
the big one that year. I think the Amazing Spider-Man came out that year. One of the Twilight films came out that year. So the first Hobbit film I think came out that year, maybe, or one of the Hobbit films. So there were some big blockbuster films out this year, and this one definitely got washed away in the Martian dunes, I guess.
Yeah, I think their plan was to make like a Princess of Mars, the Gods of Mars, and the Warlord of Mars like into a trilogy because as they're written, like they're a trilogy focused on John Carter and Deja Thoris. And guess what their kid's name is?
uh, I don't know.
Carthoris. So it's like
Carthoris.
maybe he didn't want to talk about it,
Car
you know?
his name was Carthosaurus. Yeah, I didn't want to talk about it. He wore a little orange uh, loincloth thing there, modeled after his
Yeah. Could
mom
have
and
been
dad's
beautiful.
looks. That would have been
Could
good.
have
That
been
would have been good.
could have been a saga focusing on their children, but yeah, like I'm kind of just blown away by, I mean, like a lot of this is hindsight, but
Sure, yeah. Hmm.
if you kind of have like a director, like, I mean, Andrew Stanton is a good director. Like he
Won
directed
two Oscars, I
Finding
think.
Nemo.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's a good director, but if you kind of notice the something about those films is that they're animated, you know. This
Right.
would
Yeah.
be his first live action film. So I wonder if he needed a co-director, or like maybe he should be given some baby films to start out with to get used to the process before he just kind of dove in, to like
Hmm.
ask for a big budget like that, because if you have to pay like for that budget like three times, that's like a GDP of like some small countries, like that's a
Right.
lot
Yeah.
of money, especially in 2012.
Yeah. I should have looked up to see what the first Avengers film cost just to compare it. But yeah, I mean the production cost like almost doubled because apparently they had to reshoot almost the entire film because of just production issues and stuff like that. And you
Yeah.
know this John Carter story or the Princess of Mars story, it's very reliant on special effects and things of that nature. So that's gonna just kind of balloon the costs here. And yeah, maybe it wasn't the right project for him to come out of the gate because apparently he's still thought of pretty highly in terms of his ability to tell stories. Sometimes something like this is going to be like the death knell for someone, but I went back to then directed Finding Dory in 2016 and then has done some other things, including he's directed a couple of episodes of Stranger Things and an episode of Better Call Saul, which in my estimation is the great TV show that I've seen for sure. So I mean he's still working and doing these things, but I think maybe maybe this project just is there's a reason why it had been 100 years and no one had pulled the trigger on making this thing, I
Yeah.
think.
I guess like I admittedly love the John Carter movie. Like on Letterboxd, I gave it 4.5 stars, and I think you didn't quite go that high for some reason. But um,
Same ballpark, same ballpark.
like
I think, and
it's
that it was
funny.
also on Letterboxd, I guess.
Yeah. But it's funny because even though the marketing for this movie sucked, I'm so intrigued by it. Like I'm like it looks so cool, all these posters. It's like mystery. And I'm like, "Oh, so it's based on a book. I'll read the book before it comes out, you know?" So like I
Okay.
was inspired, to read A Princess of Mars. I saw it twice in theaters and I'm like, this is so good. It's a fun movie. It kind of looks like some really cool, real environments, Like, I mean, we kind of talked about the creator,
Mhm.
how they kind of shot on real locations. And maybe I wonder if this movie was a little too early or too late, you know? Um, because I just don't think like the CGI that they were going to use. Like, I think they just maybe needed like a smaller team, but I think they're like, let's just go big budget, kind of Lord of the Rings esque,
Mhm.
like a big a big crowd movie, It's just interesting, like it's very easy like for us like like podcast hosts to be like this is what they should have done. Like we're so wise.
Right.
We have an audio trauma. But um I don't know. It's just like I'm just kind of a it's just kind of like watching like a dumpster fire happen. It's like should I be watching this? Probably not, but like I still give it 4.5 stars and I love it and like I want everyone to watch it, but like it did lose money and it was kind of a failed trilogy, but
Yeah.
and probably a failed Disney ride attraction. But can I just say that this could have been one of the coolest Disney park rides
Mm-hmm.
ever? Because imagine, like, what if you go, like, you're waiting in the queue and, like, it's kind of like you approach, like, John Carter's mansion and it's kind of like his research into, like, the Therns on this world and, like,
Okay.
traveling amongst the stars, kind of like that aesthetic, like the early 1900s, Uh, and then it's like plot twist, you're going to Mars, and it's like kind of like you fly around on Mars, and then it ends up, guess where?
I don't know either.
A
Either
gift
on
shop, and
oh,
there's
gift
all
shop.
this merch, and there's
Oh,
a
I thought you
Willa
meant on the I
plushie.
thought I thought you meant on the ride. Yeah, they needed a merch shop to recoup some of the money. Um
Yeah,
just thinking about that, the way you described the ride, this John Carter of Mars, Princess of Mars would be a pretty good video game, I have to say. Maybe they should have went that route with it for
yeah.
sure. Um and I mean, there's some stuff that I really actually liked about the movie. I did not give it as high a rating as Cassia. And before we get into the movie here anymore, I'm just going to read this little a synopsis here off of IMDb, so people who have never seen it kind of know at least a little bit what we're talking about. So, transported to Barsoom, a Civil War vet discovers a barren planet seemingly inhabited by 12-foot tall barbarians. Finding himself a prisoner of these creatures, he escapes only to encounter Woola and a princess in desperate need of a savior. Okay, yeah, yeah, okay, that's fair. I guess that is kind of about that stuff there. But I liked some aspects of the movie I liked quite a bit. I liked kind of the introduction there when you're at John Carter's mansion and he's called in basically like his attorney and Edgar Rice Burroughs, I guess, who is playing his nephew. And I actually kind of liked that. And it felt very much like that was how they were setting up like what would have been the trilogy
Yeah.
because Edgar Rice Burroughs kind of reads, John Carter's diary, and that's how they tell the story then through like a flashback of him reading that diary. And I think that's probably how they had intended to kind of weave the whole trilogy of stories there. So I liked that. The budget is on full display because this thing looks glorious for 2012. It holds up really, really well. I think it would probably look a little bit better maybe if you did it today, but the problem is then, and it's funny you had, kind of compared it to Lord of the Rings. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of the Lord of the Rings show that was just on Amazon, because about every like minute of the show that ticks by, you're like, man, this looks like it cost $10 million. This looks like it costs like $15 million. This
Probably
looks,
did.
and it probably did because it looks really good, and it's almost like jarring, like how expensive looking it looks.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess if there's money that's not going to Jeff Bezos, I'm okay with that. But
Yeah, that's fair.
well, maybe we'll
Jeff
edit that
Bezos is
out.
John Carter of Mars, maybe.
Maybe. Um, but yeah, like I guess like for me, I think like the Barsoom series and John Carter of Mars, whatever you want to call it, like could be adapted as a movie. Like I believe like something can be a movie. It could be a TV show, but it can be a movie. It just you can only really get it right once,
Hmm.
like you don't
Yeah.
get to you don't get to keep trying. You get to maybe try and do a reboot every 20-25 years, and sometimes people get sick of that, but I guess like it resonated with me. You kind of just like it kind of just starts, uh, in Arizona, and then like he kind of stumbles into this cave, and it's like this doesn't look like a regular cave, and you just kind of see him like on Mars, and he's like, whoa, and it's like he can kind of jump and stuff, and like it kind of reminded me of like Superman, like in the early comics, like he couldn't fly, he just could, I think like leap a building in a single bound or something.
Hmm. Yeah.
And having read the book, I was like, I think I kind of prefer the movie, actually, like a modern retelling. It doesn't
Hmm.
replace the book. I think they're just celebrating it. And because in the books, everyone's in the nude, and it's like I don't really like that detail. But in this one, like people get to wear clothes. So I'm like, cool, clothes. I like that. Um, but
People are almost in the nude. Well, not really. Only really John and Deja. Everyone else is like head to toe, like fully dressed. But those two
yeah,
are pretty scantily clad, I will say for sure.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I liked kind of that. I liked, the ability here of John Carter. He's, kind of this Civil War vet, I guess, kind of thing back on Earth, and then comes here. He has this ability to jump high and kind of do those things. Deja is the princess of Mars. She's very adept at fighting, as well. And it's weird, because I think this would make a really good show, or it would have made a good two-part movie. It kind of suffers the same way that that like Dune does, that Dune film from 1984, is that there's so much stuff it's trying to tell here, and
yeah,
it's moving through the stuff at lightning pace, and I'm like, I don't understand any of this stuff. Like, like just about like the moment you think you're wrapping your head around something, it's like on to the next thing, and like, okay,
yeah.
all right, sure, fair enough. I love Willem Dafoe is in this. Willem Dafoe is awesome. So
Hmm.
anytime he's in anything, that's pretty good. The creature design of that race of aliens that's there is really good, and I kind of like that. Um, Now to go back to what I'd mentioned, kind of in that the John Favreau kind of pitch for it. I think it was his that said he wanted to take more of like a Planet of the Apes kind of approach to it. I think that would work actually really, really good, because obviously when Edgar Rice Burroughs is writing the story about Mars, we don't know anything about Mars yet, right? So, but now we
People
do
were
know some stuff about.
speculating back in that time,
Yeah.
like people might live on Mars, like they didn't know.
Exactly. But and now we know, kind of more stuff about Mars. So it's not like impossible to, because this is a movie, right? So you're suspending just some belief in, anything that you watch ever. But that stuff gets a little trickier the more things that we actually learn about Mars. So I would have liked, I think, the idea to treat it almost as like this Planet of the Apes thing, where it's like a not necessarily just a beam me up Scotty onto Mars kind of a thing, but kind of this like alternate reality sort of thing, or some like time travel element to it, where Mars could have been colonized. I think might have been a way to present it a little bit more
Yeah.
digestible, I guess, for modern audiences, or at least for myself anyway. But I mean, the movie was fun enough. It's tough because I don't know like where the writing for John Carter was going, because the writing really for everyone else was not too bad, but John's is like completely dumbed down, and that's no fault of Taylor Kitsch. Taylor Kitsch is an excellent actor. He was in one of my favorite television shows of all time, Friday Night Lights. He was just excellent in Waco, The Aftermath, that TV miniseries where he played David Koresh. He was excellent in that, so he's a very good actor, but didn't have a lot to work with. And I'm wondering if that's maybe you could shine some light on this, Cassia, because I don't know if that was just taking of like his character within the books, or just a decision to make him just seem kind of like this like, I don't know, like stubborn, like adult kind of a character. I don't know, but it felt very very awkward, or something ham-fisted maybe.
Yeah, in the book, it's something they kind of drop in the series because they're like, it doesn't make sense and it's weird. Like, they're kind of like, John Carter is a man who can't die on Earth. He just has fought in many wars, like, and then he ends up going to Mars. I'm like, it's too much of a detail. Like, it's too much, you know? So I'm
Hmm.
kind of glad they dropped that in the book, but I'm like, they did kind of need to give him something to work through, like that makes him kind of grumpy, you know? I think they did do that. And you see that in the flashback, you know, where it's like he's trying to protect Deja and he's having flashbacks of his wife and child dying.
Hmm.
I just think they needed to give him more, and maybe a more experienced director or something could have addressed that more. Um, so, because I do think everyone has a story, but like ironically, when it's called John Carter, um, he's kind of just there, you know. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, it's kind of a little bit of like a journey movie, maybe like a little bit of a fetch quest, learn quest, you know, a little bit of a love quest, you know. And I do have to say, I did like the Deja John Carter romance. I'm like, they're
Hmm.
young, they're attractive, and kind of scantily clad for a Disney film. Like, of course, they're gonna fall in love, or at least have some hormonal reactions there. Like, it reminded me
Yeah.
of like Superman and Lois, you know, like where he's jumping, you know, and she's like, "What? Like, who's got you?" You know, a little bit of Anakin and Padme, you know, and then Luke brotherly protecting Leia, you know. Kind of
Hmm.
just reminded me of that. And yeah, like they also added the Therns to the movie, which might have been a step too much.
Hmm.
It is interesting, but I think they were trying to have them be the overarching villains for a trilogy, but the hard thing is that trilogy didn't happen, you know, like
Right.
so sometimes you gun so hard for a trilogy that you kind of sacrifice your first movie, and then all you have is that first movie. So it's
Yeah.
just, yeah. So it's
Yeah. It's
kind of
it,
like a beautiful accident that I still give 4.5 stars.
it's kind of funny because it has very good bones. Like the story of it's very good. Like I said, I liked like the actors within the film. I thought John Carter and Deja Thoris had really good kind of on-screen chemistry. But it's funny to think that this and the Avengers both came out in the same years, and you have the Avengers that's leading all of these breadcrumbs to build up to this thing, and John Carter is like, no breadcrumbs, here's everything all at once, 2 hours and 15 minutes,
Eat
try to
the
make
whole
sense of it,
baguette at once,
eat,
you
eat
know?
the whole
So,
eat the whole thing at once. So that was kind of my biggest takeaway of it. Like it wasn't like unwatchable or anything like that. I just didn't think that it was that good. But on one hand, it was 2 hours and 15 minutes, and the whole time I'm like, I really wish they would explain all this stuff more. But on the other hand, I'm like, I really am excited for this 2 hours and 15 minutes to be over.
Yeah, but one thing I do have to say is the film crew for John Carter discovered a dinosaur fossil whilst filming. So,
Oh,
did the MCU do that?
I don't know.
Probably not. So,
Probably not. They should have sold the dinosaur fossil to a museum so they could get
yeah,
some money back off of it. But
yeah,
the cast is like insane. All the people that are in it: Thomas Hayden Church, Mark Strong, Ciarán Hinds, Dominic West, James Purefoy, Bryan Cranston. Bryan Cranston is in the movie for like 39 seconds.
yeah,
Pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, so I mean, it had a lot of like building blocks that were there. It just ultimately kind of fell flat. And I think, kind of reiterate what I said at the opening. I don't think that people really understood what this movie was or was supposed to be, and then it just kind of got off onto a bad start, and then it's hard to recover from stuff like that for sure. But
yeah,
I think the possibility of doing something within the franchise, it's not even a franchise anymore. I think it's just in the basically uh, public domain now. At this point, it's old enough now where anyone could make their own Princess of Mars film. And there actually was a Princess of Mars film. It was a direct to DVD movie, but I couldn't really find out too much about that, whether it was any good or not. And I wasn't
I'm
willing to
guessing not.
get on
So,
eBay and track down a
yeah,
copy of it to find out for sure. But yeah, I don't know. I think that it's an interesting story. You can definitely tell that it's dated, and that's kind of the funny thing. We mentioned all of the stuff that this inspired, and inspired a lot of authors. Robert Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, and now their stories are what are inspiring people. And in 20 or 30 years, like stories that are being written like in our lifetimes now, Cassia, you and I are going to be the ones that are inspiring people in that way. So I don't know. It's kind of interesting when you take a step back and you look at kind of the overarching sort of impact that something like this book from 1912 had on people.
yeah. Because I think if they had just made this movie for cheaper or had marketed it better, like, I don't think it's like a horrible movie. I think it's just like, um, I think it kind of shows, like, I was like, who was in charge of the marketing campaign? And it's like, oh, Andrew Stanton. He was given full control as a first time director. And like, that kind of answers that, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What I kind of think is like the action shots that uh, they should have been shot first, so they could be CGI'd first for the previews, and kind of like, I don't know, maybe play up Deja's character and the romance and like kind of like the journey, and like mentioning that it's like based on like the century old series, like by Edgar Rice Burroughs, like, because I think
Mm-hmm.
like all that could do is help. I think this movie was made with love and intent, and I love the score by Michael. Is it Giacchino? Joaquino?
Michael Giacchino, yeah, did the
Giacchino?
score for Rogue One as well, right? So,
Yeah, like I there isn't like a part of this film that I'm like, oh, they were just phoning it in, except for like marketing.
sure,
But
yeah.
yeah, I think after this failed and like kind of some other original sci-fi ideas that Disney had failed, I think they're just like, we bought MCU, that worked, we're just gonna buy Star Wars. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I
yeah.
think by the time this came out, the negotiations were already kind of underway, or at least kind of those preliminary meetings between Disney and George Lucas were kind of already underway. So yeah, I think that definitely kind of put a nail in the coffin for any more John Carter stuff, at least as far as Disney is concerned. Now that being said, it is in the public domain, so anything is possible. They could go and do anything that they wanted to, and I think that this would make a really entertaining like Disney Plus type of a show where you could spend a little bit more time, lower the budget, use some of the kind of technological like advances in filmmaking that have happened,
Yeah.
in the last 10, 11, 12 years, and tell the story and make it more compelling, change the name back to Princess of Mars, and have it focus, kind of more on that, right? More on Deja Thoris, because I thought that her character was really interesting, but unfortunately, you strip her of the title and give it to John Carter, and then John Carter is expected to kind of carry the load for this film. But at least the way he was portrayed in this movie was not very interesting. I didn't think. I thought his kind of death and wealth accumulated back on Earth was more interesting than like the actual like 2 hours we saw spent with him on Mars. So maybe there's a different way to tell the story, or to adapt it to make it a little bit more interesting, or I don't know, just kind of modernize it up a little bit, so to speak. There is something really cool that happens at the beginning, when it's kind of going through, and it shows the like Disney Castle logo, and the Disney Castle like washes out into like this blood red that we kind of associate with Mars. I thought that was really cool looking, and not something that you get on like the Disney logo very often to play with it like that. So
yeah, so it's a beautiful disaster that I love. And I just can't stop loving it. And I have like a leather bound edition of like the first 5 books in the John Carter series. Maybe I'll give the Gods of Mars like another go round, But
there you go.
If you want to see John Carter, it's on Disney Plus. You can see it, or I'm sure you can rent it elsewhere. But on Disney Plus, it's free. So,
yeah, there you go. I mean, it's worth watching. I never had watched it, like I mentioned, until we decided to cover this for the podcast. So I was interested to see it, and it's interesting to watch just from like a history of film sort of thing, to have this like monumental sort of thing, because I'm old enough to remember like when Waterworld came out, and that was like the most colossal failure in cinema history. And being younger when I saw it, I never really associated that as being as bad as people seem to think. And is ultimately just because the budget ended up blowing up. But if you watch John Carter the movie, it's not for lack of effort. Like everyone, like all the actors, everything looks great. The sound design, the fight sequences, all of that stuff is really good. So everyone is giving it like 110%. Just for whatever reason, the pieces just never really fit together. But I'm glad that you, Cassia, and I'm sure there are lots of people like you who watched this and really enjoyed it, and kind of enjoyed spending the time with these characters. And I think that that's pretty cool. So if you're interested in the story at all, or you're interested in that book but maybe don't feel like watching them or reading the book, give this a watch. I think it's going to be entertaining enough for you to get through. And like you said, it's on Disney Plus, and I'll assume that most of the listeners out there probably have that for their Star Wars content and stuff like that anyways. So check it out.
Yeah. I guess we can close by saying, may the Barsoom be with you always.
The Old Republic podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, as well as everywhere else that Anchor podcasts are distributed. Subscriptions, reviews, and shares help us out.
And if you want to connect with the podcast on Twitter, we can be found at Old Republic Pod. And if you want to connect with me, I can be found on Instagram at astro_droid_.
You can find us on Patreon at www.patreon.com/Old Republic Podcast. Our intro and outro themes were composed by Dennis S. Mowers at DennisSMowersMusic.com.
This episode of the Old Republic Podcast has been brought to you by Nicky Dog from Patreon. May the Force be with you. We will be back soon. Bye for now.